Canada just pulled off one of the most strategic diplomatic moves in recent trade history, and it's not what you think. While the world watched Justice Minister Sean Fraser, Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangari, and Canada's fentanyl czar, Kevin Brosseau, hold a productive first meeting with U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi in Washington on Wednesday afternoon, something bigger was unfolding behind closed doors.
There could be some movement on the Canada-U.S. trade front. The cabinet minister leading those talks, Dominic LeBlanc, is in Washington and met this morning with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. The CBC's Ashley Burke joins us now from the U.S. Capitol. What can you tell us, Ashley?
JP, a Canadian source tells me that there is a sense of urgency right now, that the Canadian side sees a window to try and land a trade deal with the U.S. But the source also says that there are no guarantees that it will happen in the next few weeks. Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc is here right now in Washington. He met with Donald Trump's Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, this morning and posted a photo online calling it a productive meeting. LeBlanc's office says it lasted about 90 minutes, and it's all part of Canada's efforts to try and get the Trump administration to drop or at least lower a series of tariffs hitting Canadian sectors hard. Here's what the Prime Minister said today.
Aluminum, steel, autos, copper. They happen to have a specific on copper, and then, of course, lumber, softwood lumber, which has been an issue. So those are the areas where immediately we are focused on improving the outcomes. In order to do that, we will have to look at other areas where we can have win-win cooperation, other areas.
Today's meeting here in Washington comes after the Prime Minister announced last week that he would drop some retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. because he says he was given assurance by Donald Trump over the phone that it would intensify talks.
And Ashley, you've learned more details about how this meeting came about. What can you tell us?
JP, the Canadian source tells me that after the Prime Minister's announcement that he would drop some of those countermeasures, that Mark Carney and Donald Trump exchanged texts and that they agreed LeBlanc would come here to Washington for these talks. The source also said there was a recognition from the American side that Canada had taken.
This wasn't just another routine diplomatic meeting. This was Canada executing a masterclass in international negotiation that could completely reshape the North American trade landscape. To understand what just happened, we need to rewind to where this all started. Trump has repeatedly justified his tariffs on Canadian goods by arguing Canada has not done enough to curb the flow of fentanyl into the United States. But here's what makes this accusation so problematic. According to U.S. government statistics, American authorities seized 43 pounds of fentanyl at the Canadian border last year, accounting for 0.2% of the total seized nationwide. That's right, less than 0.25%. Yet Trump has used this microscopic fraction to justify massive tariffs on Canadian goods, creating a trade war that has cost both nations billions in lost revenue.
I like them. You know, look, I'm fighting for the United States. Canada and Mexico take a lot of our business over the years, over 25, 30 years, especially during the Biden years. They took a lot of our business, and it's basically all coming back into the United States now. Well, hot as a pistol, and it's coming back in. Because of tariffs and the incentives we give, it's coming back. And it's impossible, I think, for another country to stop it. And we are working on something. We want to be very good to Canada. I like Carney a lot. I think he's a good person. And we had a very good talk yesterday, so I think it'll be good.
But Canada's response has been nothing short of brilliant. They discussed shared priorities and explored ways to strengthen collaboration between their departments, Justice Canada said in a readout following the meeting. On the surface, this sounds like standard diplomatic language, but dig deeper and you'll see Canada is playing chess while others are playing checkers in this negotiation.
So the first thing to say is, let's be clear. We have the best deal of anyone in the world right now. We have the lowest tariff rate on average, a little over 5.5% versus that 16% average for the world, and in many cases much higher. We have that confirmed, an executive order of the president a few weeks ago. It's important that we preserve that. It's important that we preserve that. Well, we focus on two things: the strategic sectors, steel, aluminum, autos, lumber, and we focus on the upcoming review and likely changes to CUSMA. So we are matching something the Americans have done. here first. And it's very significant. It's unique. We get the benefit. The second thing is
The meeting focused on Canada's efforts to toughen the border and crack down on fentanyl. Jeremy Bellefeuille, a spokesperson for Mr. Fraser, told the Globe and Mail. He said there was an acknowledgement from the Americans of the work Canada is doing on this front, and everyone exchanged personal phone numbers at the end in order to keep in touch. Think about that for a moment. U.S. officials acknowledge Canada's border security efforts. This is huge because it undermines Trump's entire justification for the tariffs. The meeting wasn't just about fentanyl, though. The department also said the meeting was an opportunity for Canada to highlight its efforts to keep communities safe from fentanyl and transnational criminal organizations on both sides of the border. Canada was systematically dismantling Trump's narrative piece by piece with actual data and concrete actions. But here's where the story gets really interesting. This meeting was the second high-level engagement in just 2 days. On Wednesday, Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc's office said he was leaving Washington with a sense that progress was made after a meeting with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. And get this, a Canadian source told CBC News that Tuesday's meeting was meant to last an hour, but went for 90 minutes. The source said there was a sense of optimism on the Canadian side following the meeting. When diplomatic meetings run 50% longer than planned and officials are exchanging personal phone numbers, you know something significant is happening behind the scenes. Canada wasn't just defending itself, it was going on the offensive, but in the most diplomatic way possible. The timing of these meetings is crucial. They came just days after Canada announced it would remove all tariffs on goods from the United States that are covered by the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement. By September 1st, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced on Friday. Critics immediately accused Carney of capitulating to Trump, but they're missing the bigger picture entirely. Carney's move was pure strategic genius. Carney said the commitment of the U.S. to the core of USMCA means that over 85% of Canada-U.S. trade continues to be free of tariffs. He said the U.S. average tariff rate on Canadian goods is 5.6% and remains the lowest among all its trading partners. By matching U.S. exemptions, Canada forced Trump into a position where he could no longer claim Canada was being unreasonable or uncooperative. Carney said Friday that Trump assured him that dropping retaliatory tariffs will kickstart negotiations between the two countries. This is the key insight. Carney didn't give up leverage, he traded tactical flexibility for strategic positioning. By removing tariffs on CUSMA-compliant goods while notably keeping Canada's 25% tariffs on U.S. autos, steel, and aluminum in place for now, Canada demonstrated both good faith and resolve. The brilliance of this strategy becomes clear when you understand what Canada retained. This includes steel, aluminum, and copper, which are subject to 50% U.S. tariffs, and automobiles, which are subject to 25% tariffs, with a carve-out for U.S. parts. These are precisely the sectors where Canada has the most leverage and where U.S. tariffs hurt American consumers the most. But Canada's masterstroke wasn't just about tariffs, it was about narrative control. The government is also promising to do more to break up fentanyl and human smuggling organizations, including by stepping up investigations of money laundering and better tracking of chemicals that could be used to make fentanyl. By proactively addressing Trump's stated concerns, Canada removed his justification for maintaining punitive tariffs. The meeting with Attorney General Bondi was particularly strategic. In a fact sheet issued in late July, the White House said Canada had failed to cooperate to curb the ongoing flood of fentanyl and other illicit drugs into the U.S. from Canada. But a study from the Manhattan Institute, an American think tank, found large Canadian border fentanyl seizures were relatively rare. By getting U.S. officials to acknowledge Canada's border security efforts, Carney effectively forced the Trump administration to contradict its own narrative. The personal touch matters too. The meeting lasted about 45 minutes and the tone was warm and cordial, according to Fraser's office. The Canadian officials also exchanged personal numbers with Bondi and agreed to stay in close contact. This isn't just diplomacy, it's relationship building at the highest levels. When trade disputes inevitably arise in the future, these personal connections could prove invaluable. Canada even showed class in tragedy. The Canadian officials also offered their condolences over a shooting at a Minnesota church that has left 3 dead, including the shooter, and 17 people injured. These human moments matter in diplomacy, creating bonds that transcend policy disagreements. The reaction from Washington tells us everything we need to know about Canada's strategy. A White House official told NBC News that Canada's move was long overdue. We look forward to continuing our discussions with Canada on the administration's trade and national security concerns, the official said. This is diplomatic speak for we're ready to make a deal. But Canada's strategy goes beyond just managing Trump. The move comes as the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which Trump negotiated during his first term, is scheduled to undergo a review later this year. By positioning itself as the reasonable partner willing to work within existing frameworks, Canada is setting the stage for favorable outcomes in these crucial negotiations. Canada and China are the only countries that have retaliated against Trump in his trade war. This makes Canada's approach even more significant. While China and the U.S. remain locked in an escalating trade conflict, Canada chose a different path, strategic de-escalation designed to preserve its economic interests while maintaining its dignity. The numbers support Canada's approach. Carney said the commitment of the U.S. to the core of USMCA means that over 85% of Canada-U.S. trade continues to be free of tariffs. He said the U.S. average tariff rate on Canadian goods is 5.6% and remains the lowest among all its trading partners. By focusing on this reality rather than the rhetoric, Canada demonstrated that it understands the difference between symbolic victories and actual economic outcomes. Critics accused Carney of abandoning his elbows-up approach. Carney faced a series of questions from reporters asking if he had effectively folded in the face of U.S. economic pressure, with several pointing to his frequent use of the slogan, "elbows up" on the campaign trail. The term is a hockey reference suggesting an aggressively protective posture and embodied Carney's promise to take a tough stance against the Trump administration. But they're missing the point entirely. Sometimes the toughest stance is knowing exactly when to shift your tactics.
And there is a time in a game, in a big game, and this is a big game, when you go hard in the corners, your elbows up. The time in a game where you drop the gloves in the first period and you send a message. And we've done that pretty uniquely in the world. We happen to have the best deal with the Americans right now, I'd note. But there's also a time in a game where you want the puck, you want a stick handle, you want to pass, you want to put the puck in the net. And we're moving later into the game, and we're at that time in the game.
Canada currently has the best trade deal with the United States, Carney said of the agreement, stating several times that Canada was matching moves from the U.S. This framing is crucial. Canada isn't backing down, it's matching American moves while maintaining its own leverage in key sectors. The timing of these diplomatic engagements reveals another layer of Canada's strategy. By scheduling back-to-back meetings with key U.S. officials, Canada created momentum and demonstrated serious commitment to resolving disputes. The sit-down in Washington was the second in as many days between top officials from the two governments. This intensive diplomatic schedule shows Canada treating the relationship with the urgency it deserves. What makes Canada's approach so masterful is how it addresses both the substance and the politics of the trade dispute. On substance, Ottawa has unveiled a suite of measures meant to toughen the border. The government is also promising to do more to break up fentanyl and human smuggling organizations, including by stepping up investigations of money laundering and better tracking of chemicals that could be used to make fentanyl. These aren't just talking points, they're concrete policy changes that address legitimate U.S. concerns. On the political side, Canada gave Trump what he needed to declare victory while preserving its own core interests. The Prime Minister disputed any notion that Canada is appeasing Trump, noting that Canada is matching what the U.S. is doing. "The President and I had a long conversation," Carney said. This framing allows both leaders to claim success with their domestic audiences. The sophistication of Canada's approach becomes even clearer when you consider what it retained. Canada will retain its counter tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos, Mr. Carney said, as both countries work intensively to find arrangements for these industries. These are precisely the sectors where Canada has the most leverage and where continued tariffs serve Canadian interests. Canada's strategy also recognizes the reality of Trump's negotiating style. However, the string of deals Mr. Trump reached with other trade partners in recent months, which left tariffs in place, suggested this was an unrealistic goal, Mr. Carney said. Rather than demanding the impossible, Canada focused on achievable outcomes that serve its long-term interests. The meeting with Attorney General Bondi was particularly important because it addressed the core justification for Trump's tariffs. Justice Minister Sean Fraser, Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangari, and Canada's fentanyl czar, Kevin Brosseau, were meeting with U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi in Washington this afternoon to discuss the Canadian government's work to strengthen its criminal justice system and border security. Fraser discussed the criminal justice reforms he will be proposing this fall, while Anandasangari and Brosseau focused on fentanyl. By bringing Canada's fentanyl czar directly to the meeting, Canada demonstrated its serious commitment to addressing U.S. concerns. Kevin Brosseau, who attended the meeting, was appointed fentanyl czar in February after the trade war between Canada and the U.S. began. This appointment itself shows Canada's responsiveness to American priorities. The broader implications of Canada's strategy extend far beyond the immediate trade dispute. Canada and the United States will intensify our discussions to address current trade challenges in strategic sectors and to seize major immediate opportunities for trade, investment, and security partnerships, Mr. Carney said. This language suggests a comprehensive approach to the relationship that goes beyond just resolving current disputes. Canada's approach also recognizes the importance of timing in international relations. There is a review of the free trade agreement in the spring. We're starting our preparations. Lana Payne, president of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, characterized Carney's announcement as Canada backing down and said the country shouldn't back down unless the U.S. drops all punitive tariffs. But Carney understood that positioning Canada favorably for this review was more important than short-term symbolic victories. The personal relationships being built in these meetings could prove crucial in future negotiations. Mr. Belfort characterized the meeting as a first touch. It is the first time the three officials have met with Ms. Bondi, and said it was organized after she requested it about a month ago. When the U.S. Attorney General is requesting meetings with Canadian officials, it signals a level of respect and engagement that serves Canada's long-term interests. What's particularly brilliant about Canada's strategy is how it turns Trump's own tactics against him. Trump has consistently used the threat of escalation to extract concessions from trading partners. But by proactively addressing his stated concerns while maintaining leverage in key areas, Canada removed his justification for escalation while preserving its own negotiating position. The economic logic behind Canada's approach is sound. Canada will eliminate all retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods that qualify under CUSMA rules of origin, effective September 1st. Sectoral surtaxes and tariffs remain in place on U.S. steel, aluminum, and autos. This targeted approach maximizes Canada's economic benefits while minimizing political costs. Canada's strategy also demonstrates sophisticated understanding of American domestic politics. By addressing border security and fentanyl concerns, Canada gave Trump talking points he can use with his base while creating space for more productive negotiations on trade issues. The source with knowledge of the meeting between Bondi and Canadian officials said their discussions were not directly related to Canada-U.S. trade talks. However, Trump has repeatedly justified his tariffs on Canadian goods by arguing Canada has not done enough to curb the flow of fentanyl into the United States. The reaction from various stakeholders reveals the complexity of Canada's position. Lana Payne, president of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, characterized Carney's announcement as Canada backing down and said the country shouldn't back down unless the U.S. drops all punitive tariffs. Trump's attacks on auto, steel, aluminum, and forestry sectors are hurting Canadian workers in real time, she posted on social media. But this criticism misses the strategic nature of Carney's approach. By maintaining tariffs on the sectors that matter most to Canadian workers while removing them where they serve little purpose, Canada optimized its position. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who has advocated robust retaliation, said he spoke to Mr. Carney after the announcement to stress the need for an agreement for the hardest-hit sectors. If the federal government can't achieve that, they need to hit back hard against U.S. tariffs and provide additional supports for the workers and businesses in these sectors, Mr. Ford said in a social media post. Canada's approach also recognizes the global context of trade relationships. The Canadian leader said that his country is not the only one working to reorient itself as the Trump administration upends decades of economic integration with countries around the world. By positioning itself as a reasonable and reliable partner, Canada distinguishes itself from other countries locked in trade conflicts with the U.S. The sophistication of Canada's diplomatic approach extends to the smallest details. The Canadian delegation has described it as a touch-base meeting with the goal of maintaining an open dialogue with the Americans. Even the language used to describe these meetings is carefully chosen to emphasize cooperation rather than confrontation. What makes Canada's strategy so effective is how it addresses both immediate concerns and long-term interests. Carney also said his government will focus on strengthening the Canadian economy by expanding trade with other countries, doubling the pace of home building and making investments in national defense. This comprehensive approach shows Canada isn't just reacting to U.S. pressure, it's building a stronger foundation for future prosperity. The timing of these announcements and meetings creates a powerful narrative of Canadian reasonableness and American acknowledgement. White House welcomes the move, calling it long overdue, but broader disputes remain unresolved. Even this grudging acknowledgement represents progress from the hostile rhetoric that characterized earlier phases of the trade dispute. Canada's approach also demonstrates understanding of the importance of preparation for future negotiations. Canada plans consultations ahead of next year's CUSMA review while advancing domestic nation-building projects. This dual focus on international engagement and domestic strength positions Canada well for whatever comes next. The personal relationships being built through these meetings could prove invaluable. When trade officials exchange personal phone numbers and agree to stay in close contact, it creates channels for communication that can prevent minor disagreements from escalating into major disputes. He said there was an acknowledgement from the Americans of the work Canada is doing on this front, and everyone exchanged personal phone numbers at the end in order to keep in touch. What's remarkable about Canada's strategy is how it transforms a defensive position into an offensive one. Rather than simply responding to U.S. pressure, Canada proactively addressed American concerns while maintaining its own leverage. This approach doesn't just resolve the immediate crisis, it positions Canada as the kind of partner the U.S. wants to work with on future challenges. The broader implications of Canada's approach could reshape North American trade relationships for years to come. By demonstrating that disputes can be resolved through serious engagement rather than escalating rhetoric, Canada offers a model for how middle powers can effectively manage relationships with superpowers in an era of increasing economic nationalism. Canada just showed the world how to turn a trade war into a strategic victory. By addressing legitimate concerns, maintaining key leverage, and building personal relationships at the highest levels, Carney didn't just defuse a crisis, he positioned Canada for long-term success. While critics focus on what Canada gave up, they're missing what it gained: credibility, respect, and a seat at the table for the negotiations that will shape North America's economic future. In a world where trade relationships are increasingly weaponized, Canada just demonstrated that sometimes the strongest position is the most reasonable one.